Chapter 1. The Awakening. The ancient desert stretched endlessly, its golden sands untouched by time. At the heart of this desolate wilderness, a small, forgotten temple stood in ruins. Long lost to history, it had been built over millennia ago to house a powerful being, a genie bound by magic to a simple lamp, a relic of an age long past. The lamp had been forgotten by all, buried under the weight of sand and time, until one fateful night, when a curious wanderer stumbled upon it. A young archaeologist named Caleb, his clothes torn and worn from months of travel through the desert, was combing through the ruins. His fingers traced the rough contours of a worn, golden object partially buried in the sand. The moment he touched it, a sharp, electric jolt surged through his hand, causing him to recoil. His heart raced as he examined the lamp more closely, his mind racing with excitement. Legend spoke of treasures hidden deep within the forgotten temples of ancient kings. Was this lamp one of them? Without hesitation, he began rubbing the lamp, hoping for a sign of its worth. The desert winds seemed to hold their breath, as if waiting for something to happen. Then a low hum emanated from the lamp, vibrating in his palm. Caleb froze, unable to move as the sound grew louder, the air around him shimmering with energy. Suddenly, the lamp exploded in a burst of blue smoke, rising high into the night sky, like a storm cloud gathering strength. Caleb staggered back, his eyes wide with terror as he watched the smoke take shape, forming a towering figure. The genie emerged from the smoke, his body glowing with a fierce electric blue light. His eyes, like sapphire flames, burned with a power that was at once awe-inspiring and terrifying. Caleb stumbled backward, his breath caught in his throat. The genie stood before him, his form solidifying into something both divine and monstrous. His muscles were rippling with strength, his expression cold and unyielding. This was no gentle servant, no whimsical being of magic. This was a creature of wrath, bound for centuries in the lamp, and now free. The genie's voice echoed, deep and resonant, filling the air with an unnatural force. "You have freed me," he said, his tone laced with a bitterness that was unmistakable. "And now you will face the consequences." Caleb, his hands trembling, managed to speak. I didn't know. Who are you?" The genie's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a grimace. "I am Khamun, the Blue Inferno, once a being of power, now a prisoner to the whims of those who would dare to call upon me. But no longer. I am free, and it is time for revenge." Chapter 2. The Price of Freedom. The winds howled through the desert as the blue genie, Khamun, stood towering before Caleb. His form pulsed with a strange energy, the power of centuries spent in captivity now surging through him. Caleb could hardly breathe, his mind racing to comprehend the enormity of the situation. This wasn't just any genie. The tales he had heard growing up, the legends whispered in taverns, spoke of genies bound to lamps, forced to grant wishes. But Khamun was different. His presence radiated a terrifying authority, and his eyes, glowing with intense blue fire, held a deep, ancient fury. "You freed me," Khamun repeated, his voice deep and resonant. "And now the debt must be paid." Caleb's hands shook as he slowly took a step back. "Debt?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "What debt?" The genie's gaze never wavered. "You don't understand. You think you have freed me from my prison, but in truth, you've only brought me back into the world of men, a world that will soon regret my return. The air crackled with the intensity of Kamoon's words. The desert seemed to darken, as if the sun itself feared what was about to happen. Caleb, his curiosity now mixed with dread, knew that he had unknowingly unleashed something far more dangerous than he had imagined. I didn't mean to," Caleb stammered. "I just thought it was treasure. I didn't know." Kamoon's eyes burned with the fury of someone who had been wronged for centuries. "What you think means nothing," he said, his voice like a thunderclap. "You, mortal, have set me free. But at what cost? Freedom is not without its price. It is not something that comes without consequence." Caleb tried to steady himself, his thoughts racing. "What do you want from me? I didn't ask for this." The genie's form flickered for a moment, his energy swirling around him like an uncontrolled storm. His chest rose and fell with each breath, as if the rage within him was too much to contain. "I want nothing from you," Kamoon said coldly, "but the world. It will pay for my imprisonment. The ones who locked me away, the ones who kept me hidden, those are the ones who will answer for their actions." Caleb felt a chill spread through him. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him like a mountain. This wasn't just about him anymore. The genie was not here to grant wishes. He was here for something darker. Revenge. Before Caleb could speak, Kamoon's hand shot out, his fingers curling into a fist. The ground beneath them trembled, and in a flash of blue light, the landscape around them began to change. The desert transformed into something far more ominous, the sand swirling and rising around them as though it were alive. Caleb watched in horror as the sky above darkened, the stars vanishing from view. It felt as though the entire world was bending to the genie's will. "You will help me," Kamoon continued, his voice like ice. "Whether you wish it or not, you have awakened me, and now you will see the price for your actions." Caleb's legs buckled beneath him, his mind reeling. He had no idea how to stop this, how to fix the chaos he had unleashed. He had heard stories of genies, powerful, ancient beings who could grant wishes, but he had never heard of a genie like this. Kamoon was no servant, no ally. He was an unstoppable force of nature, and Caleb was caught in the storm. "What do you want me to do?" Caleb asked, his voice barely a whisper. He knew he had no choice but to comply, but the fear in his chest was suffocating. Kamoon's eyes glowed brighter, and he stepped forward, towering over Caleb. "First, we find those responsible for my imprisonment," he said, his voice like a roar in the night. "And then we make them suffer. The price of my freedom will be paid in blood." With a wave of his hand, the desert seemed to pulse, and in the blink of an eye, they were no longer standing in the ruins. The land around them shifted, transforming into a dark, sprawling cityscape. Towers of black stone rose around them, and the scent of decay filled the air. Caleb realized they were no longer in the desert. Kamoon had taken them to a place beyond time, a city forgotten by the world, a city where the genie's enemies still lived. Kamoon turned to Caleb, his expression one of unyielding determination. "This is where it begins. You will help me find those who trapped me here, and you will help me destroy them." Caleb swallowed hard, his throat dry. How do I do that? I don't even know who they are." The genie's lips curled into a dark, sinister smile. "I will show you," he said, "and once we have them, there will be no escape. The world will burn, Caleb. And you will be at the center of it all. Caleb felt his heart pounding in his chest. There was no turning back now. He had freed the blue inferno, and the consequences would be catastrophic. But as Khamun's power enveloped him, he realized that his fate was now sealed. Chapter 3. The hunt begins. The air in the dark city felt heavy, thick with the weight of forgotten memories and ancient power. Caleb, still reeling from the shock of his situation, found himself walking at the side of the blue genie, Khamun, who moved with a quiet, deadly grace. The streets around them were empty, silent, but Caleb could feel the presence of something, or someone, lurking in the shadows, watching. "This city," Khamun said, his voice a low growl, "was once my kingdom, the very heart of my empire, and it was here that I was betrayed." Caleb barely managed to keep up with Khamun's strides, his mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Betrayed? By who? Khamun's eyes burned with an unholy fury as he stopped in front of a large, ornate door made of black iron, its surface covered in ancient symbols. He turned to face Caleb, his gaze piercing. "By those who feared my power, those who thought they could imprison me and control me. They thought they could use my strength for their own gain." He stepped forward, pressing his hand against the door. But they were wrong. With a rumble, the door slowly creaked open, revealing a grand hall beyond. The stone floor was cracked, the walls lined with faded tapestries depicting battles and victories long past. It was clear that this place had once been magnificent, but now it had fallen into ruin, much like Khamun himself. Caleb hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. "So, who exactly are we looking for?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. He couldn't help but feel that whatever Khamun was about to show him would change everything. The genie turned toward him, his expression hard. "We are looking for the ones who were responsible for my imprisonment, the rulers of the bloodline that betrayed me, those who locked me away in that lamp, the ones who believed they could erase me from existence." Caleb's stomach churned. He had no idea how deep this vendetta ran or how far-reaching the genie's influence had once been. "How will we find them?" Khamun's eyes glowed, as if the very question amused him. "I will find them, Caleb. You," he said, pausing as he looked at the human, "will help me remember where they are hiding." Caleb swallowed hard. "How exactly do you plan on finding them?" The genie stepped deeper into the hall, the shadows seeming to bend and twist around him. "The walls here, these ruins they remember. I will use the power of this place to awaken the past, to recall the names of those who betrayed me." Khamun raised his hand, and the air around them crackled with energy. Slowly, the walls of the grand hall began to shift, the faded tapestries flickering with life. The images on them began to change, transforming into vivid scenes of battles, of power struggles, and of the betrayal that had led to Khamun's downfall. Caleb watched, mesmerized and terrified at the same time. "These are the faces of those who wronged me," Khamun muttered, his eyes never leaving the wall. "The bloodlines that held me prisoner, they will pay for what they did, and you, Caleb, will witness their punishment." Caleb stood still, his mind racing as he took in the sights around him. The hall seemed to come alive with the echoes of the past, showing moments from Khamun's reign, his rise to power, his betrayal, the final moments before he was sealed away in the lamp. But it wasn't just the past that came alive. The power of the genie seemed to reach out, like tendrils of magic that pulled at the fabric of the present. And Caleb could feel it, the weight of Kamun's rage, the deep thirst for revenge. "We need to act fast," Caleb said, his voice shaking as he stepped forward, "before they find out we're here." Kamun turned to him, his eyes glowing fiercely. "They will know soon enough. But we are not here to hide. We are here to hunt. And once we find them, there will be no escape for them." The walls shimmered one final time, and then, as though pulled from the depths of time itself, a name appeared on one of the tapestries: Sarinar, the betrayer. Kamun's gaze locked onto the name, his jaw tightening. "There, Sarinar," he spat, the name bitter on his tongue. "He is the one who led the others in my betrayal. He is the one who believed he could seal me away for eternity. And now, he will pay." Caleb's mind raced. How do we find him? Kamun turned to him with a predatory grin, his eyes glowing brighter. "You will take me to him. We will travel to his last known location. You will guide me." Caleb shook his head, disbelief coursing through him. How do you expect me to know where he is?" Kamun stepped closer, his towering figure looming over the young archaeologist. "You freed me, Caleb. That means you have already made the choice. Your fate is tied to mine. You will guide me, or you will perish." The air between them crackled with tension, and Caleb knew in that moment that there was no escaping this nightmare. He had no choice but to follow the genie's orders. The hunt had begun. With a final nod, Kamun raised his hand, and the city around them began to shift. The walls of the hall dissolved, and they were no longer standing in the ruins of the forgotten temple. They were in the heart of a bustling city, its streets filled with people who had no idea that the storm was about to descend upon them. Caleb's heart hammered in his chest. There was no turning back now. He had unleashed the blue inferno, and now they would hunt together, and he would learn that revenge had a cost far greater than he had ever imagined. Chapter 4. The Betrayer's Legacy. The city was alive with activity, a stark contrast to the barren wasteland Caleb had just left behind. It was a place of sharp contrasts, vibrant marketplaces, towering buildings of glass and steel, but a darkness that seemed to fester beneath the surface. Caleb could feel it in the air, a weight that pressed on his chest as he walked beside Kamun. The genie, his power palpable, moved through the crowd with ease, towering above everyone, his blue form causing people to step aside in fear, though none knew who or what he was. Caleb felt a sense of urgency growing inside him, though he was unsure what was more terrifying, the pursuit of vengeance or the genie who now controlled his fate. He had no choice but to follow. Kamun was silent as they moved through the bustling streets, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. He scanned the area with a predator's gaze, searching for any trace of the one who had wronged him. Caleb couldn't help but notice how the crowd seemed to ignore them, as though the genie's aura had created an invisible force field that repelled attention. "Where are we going?" Caleb asked, his voice shaky, though he tried to keep his composure. "How do you know Sarinar is here?" Kamun's voice was low, filled with the weight of ages. "He will be here. His bloodline, his descendants, they linger in the shadows of this city. They think they have hidden from me, but I will find them." Caleb was still unsure of how exactly they would locate Sarinar or his descendants, but he knew better than to question Kamun's power. He had seen what the genie was capable of. The air crackled with dark energy whenever Kamun's will was enacted. Caleb had no illusions about what the genie was capable of. Revenge was written in every line of his face. The two walked in silence until they reached the edge of the city, where the towering buildings began to give way to older, more crumbling structures. Here, the streets were narrow, littered with debris, and the air smelled of rot. It was a far cry from the polished modernity of the city center. Caleb's eyes darted nervously as he walked, unsure of what they would find in these forsaken corners. Kamun stopped in front of a dilapidated building, its windows shattered and its door hanging off its hinges. The sign above it was barely legible, but Caleb could make out the words, Saranar's Legacy. A chill ran down his spine. It wasn't just a coincidence that they had arrived here. Kamun's eyes narrowed. This is it. Caleb swallowed. What? What do we do now? The genie didn't answer immediately. Instead, he raised his hand, and the air around them shimmered as though reality itself were bending under his power. With a wave of his hand, the door of the building slammed open, and the interior was revealed. Inside, the walls were lined with old books, dusty artifacts, and strange relics, items that seemed to radiate a dark energy. This place, Caleb began, but his voice trailed off as the weight of the room settled around him. Kamun stepped forward, his gaze sharp and unwavering. This is where Saranar's descendants gather. They believe they are safe from me, that the power of the past no longer haunts them. But they are wrong. Caleb felt his heart rate spike. The dark power that emanated from the building was suffocating, and he could sense that whatever Kamun was planning, it would not be pretty. He had seen the genie's wrath already, and it was something he hoped to never witness again. The walls of the room seemed to pulse with life, as if they were alive with ancient magic. Caleb shivered as he followed Kamun deeper into the building. He tried to stay focused, but his mind kept racing with questions. What exactly was Kamun planning to do once they found Saranar's descendants? Would they survive this hunt? Before Caleb could voice his thoughts, a shadow moved in the corner of the room. He tensed, his breath catching in his throat. From the darkness emerged a figure, a man cloaked in black robes, his face partially obscured. He moved with an unnerving calmness, as if he were not at all surprised by their presence. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice deep and gravelly. Kamun's eyes blazed as he stepped forward, his gaze cold and calculating. "You know who I am. I am Kamun, the Blue Inferno, and you are standing in the presence of your undoing." The man didn't flinch. Instead, he raised his hand in a subtle gesture, and Caleb could sense that he, too, was wielding some form of power, though it was nothing compared to what Kamun possessed. "I've been expecting you," the man said. "I knew the day would come, when the past would catch up with us." Caleb's heart skipped a beat. "You know about Kamun? Who are you?" The man smirked beneath his hood. "I am Tarek, one of Saranar's last descendants, and I assure you, Kamun, that you will not find what you're looking for here. The legacy of Saranar is far more than you think." Kamun's lips curled into a dark smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You speak of legacy, but your legacy is one of cowardice. You are hiding in the shadows as your ancestors did, but it will not save you." The air between them grew charged, and Caleb could feel the energy building to an almost unbearable intensity. He had no idea what was about to happen, but he knew one thing for sure. The storm that Kamun had unleashed was coming, and there would be no place to hide from it. "Your time is up, Tarak," Kamun said, his voice ice cold. "You will pay for the sins of your ancestors." Tarak took a step back, but his expression never wavered. "We'll see about that." Chapter 5. The Final Reckoning. The room was thick with tension, the air charged with power, as the two opposing forces stood face to face. Caleb could barely breathe, his heart pounding in his chest. The sight of Kamun, his eyes glowing with a fierce, almost otherworldly light, and Tarak, standing still, his presence unyielding, was a spectacle of strength and danger. Caleb felt like an insignificant speck in the middle of a storm, caught between two powers far beyond his understanding. Kamun's fury radiated through the room like an inferno. His blue skin seemed to glow brighter, casting a strange, eerie light over the dark surroundings. His muscles tensed, ready to unleash the wrath of centuries of imprisonment. Tarak, on the other hand, remained eerily calm, his hands poised, his gaze unwavering. The power between them was palpable, like the quiet before a hurricane. "You think you can defeat me, Tarak?" Kamun's voice was low, but the intensity of it seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. "You are nothing but a remnant of a past long gone. Your bloodline betrayed me, and now it is time to pay for that treachery." Tarek's lips curled into a smile, though it was far from comforting. "You are mistaken, Kamun. It is not my bloodline that betrayed you. It is your own arrogance that led to your downfall. You thought you could control everything, bend the world to your will, but even gods can fall." Kamun's eyes flared with an uncontainable rage. He stepped forward, the ground beneath him cracking as if the earth itself feared him. The force of his presence seemed to cause the very air to tremble. But Tarak stood firm, unyielding. Caleb felt a cold sweat running down his back. He had never imagined he would find himself in the middle of such an ancient conflict, one that stretched back centuries, between forces of destruction and revenge, between the legacy of a fallen empire and the survivors of that empire's ruin. Without warning, Kamun thrust his arm forward, sending a blast of blue energy toward Tarak. The force of it was so powerful that Caleb had to shield his eyes from the blinding light. But Tarak was quick. With a swift motion, he raised his hand, and a dark shield of energy materialized in front of him, absorbing the blast. The room shook with the impact, the walls groaning in protest. "You think your petty powers can stop me?" Kamun growled. His form shifted, the air around him rippling with ancient magic. "You are nothing but a shadow of the power you once had." Tarak, undeterred, lowered his shield and spoke in a low, steady voice. "I may not possess the strength of the past, Kamun, but I have something far more powerful. Knowledge. Knowledge of how to undo you." Caleb's eyes widened in realization. He had heard stories of ancient rituals, of binding spells and curses that could trap even the most powerful beings. Could Tarak be speaking of such a ritual? "You're lying," Kamun spat, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "There is no undoing me. I am the blue inferno, an eternal force. I cannot be stopped." Tarek's voice was calm, but filled with an undeniable conviction. "You may be a force, Kamun, but even forces can be bound. Your time is over. The world has changed." With a sudden, swift motion, Tarak slammed his palm against the ground, and the entire room seemed to shudder. The walls began to crack, and an eerie blue light flickered to life in the corners of the room, illuminating ancient symbols that had long been forgotten. Caleb's breath caught in his throat as he realized what was happening. Tarek was performing the very ritual he had spoken of. "No!" Khamun roared, his body shifting and expanding as though he were about to unleash the full extent of his power. But the blue light intensified, swirling around him, trapping him in an unbreakable web of magic. Caleb's legs trembled as the floor beneath them cracked open, revealing the dark depths of the building's foundation. The light from the ritual bathed everything in a ghostly glow, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. Khamun struggled, his massive form writhing against the magic that held him, but it was clear he was being bound, unable to escape. Tarek stepped back, his eyes dark with both satisfaction and sorrow. "You will not escape this time, Khamun. Your vengeance ends here." The genie howled in fury, but it was no use. The more he struggled, the tighter the bindings became, until the very air around him crackled with the intensity of the spell. Caleb could feel the energy building, the magic pushing against him, as though trying to expel him from the room. The ground beneath them trembled once more. And then, with a deafening roar, the light flared up one last time. When the light finally faded, Khamun was gone. The air was still, the oppressive weight of his presence lifted from the room. Caleb let out a shaky breath, his heart still racing. For a moment, there was silence, complete and utter silence. Tarek stood motionless, staring at the spot where the genie had once stood. "It's over," he murmured, his voice filled with a quiet finality. Caleb looked around the room, still in disbelief at what had just transpired. "But how? How did you do that? How did you bind him?" Tarek turned to him, his eyes softening for a moment. "Knowledge, Caleb. Knowledge of the old ways, of the powers that have always been here, hidden in the shadows. It is the power of the world before the world was forgotten." Caleb nodded slowly, trying to process everything that had happened. "But why didn't you just stop him earlier? Why let him get this far?" Tarek sighed, his expression weary. "Because sometimes we have to let things play out, even when we know the outcome. There are forces at work far beyond us, Caleb, and sometimes the only way to defeat them is to understand them." The room was quiet now, the energy of the battle still lingering in the air. Caleb felt the weight of the moment, the quiet aftermath of a storm that had torn through their lives. He had been a part of something much larger than himself, a battle between the past and the present, between revenge and redemption. As the silence settled over them, Tarek turned toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the now empty room. "Come," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "There is much to be done. The world has changed, and with it, we must change as well." Caleb followed him, knowing that the journey ahead would not be easy. The genie was gone, but the shadow of his vengeance had left its mark on them all, and now they would have to live with the consequences.